Welcome to Divorcelaw with Attorney David Badanes.
Welcome to Divorcelaw with experienced attorney David Badanes. David has extensive experience in divorce, child custody, child support, divorce, mediation, and more. David personally handles each client with the personalized attention they deserve. I'm your host, John Clements, and today's episode is Dividing Retirement. What happens to pensions, 401ks, and more in a divorce? So David, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So to start off with, can you share with our listeners some of the biggest misconceptions people might have about what happens to their pension and their other retirement accounts during a divorce?
Well, what some people don't know is that the minute you are minute you're married until the minute you get filed for a divorce, in that time period, whatever retirement assets are being attained by your spouse or by you, let's put it this way. Let's say I'm the person, I have the IRA, the 401k or pension. That, even though you think it's yours, your partner, your spouse, is entitled to basically 50% in that period. So if I earn something prior to marriage, that part is excluded, and also anything earned after the commencement of the divorce is excluded. So many people don't realize that. And the other issue problem, I should say, is when it's, let's say, an IRA or a 401k, what typically is the problem is documentation or proof. People don't keep their statements typically. So if you've been married 5, 10 years or anything, even maybe 1 year, although it should be easy to get it in 1 year, what you don't know is that you have to show what you earned or put in that account prior to marriage, and that's a documentation issue. With pensions, that information is kept by the pension administrator, so you don't typically have to worry about that. They have all the information in your file, but when it's a 401k, IRA, or something similar to that, that's basically private, and you have the information if you've kept it. If you don't keep it, then even though technically the part of that, let's say IRA, that was that you funded prior to marriage, even though that should not be counted in, but if you don't, they don't know how much you had in there, they being the court. So those are the common errors or misconceptions, that it's basically
I see.
50-50 during the marriage.
Yeah, so it's 50-50 during the course of the marriage only. That's a great tip because I didn't know that, so that's wonderful. So let's talk specifically, though, about pensions for a moment. So let's say I'm a teacher, or maybe I'm a police officer, or just a government employee. What happens to my pension in the event of a divorce?
In a sense, the easier scenario, because as I just mentioned, with pensions, because they're from the government and there's a plan administrator that has all those records, how much you earned or in your pension, let's say, prior, from the date you got hired to the date you got married. And then eventually they'll get information about the date that you started a divorce. And those are the 3 key dates. And if you were in my office, I usually draw a little picture for them to illustrate, but you have to think of it again. Let's say you were, make it easy. You're married 20 years, but 5 years of that was prior to getting married. So simple math says that basically 5 over 20 is 1/4. So that 1/4 of your pension will not be split, but 3/4 of your pension will be split 50-50. There's a little bit more involved in it, but that's just simplifying it. There'll be, with the pensions and all these information, what happens is that the math, so to speak, is done by an expert that is hired by both parties, who will do the math, so to speak. And because they're a neutral party, they're not going to favor one person versus the other. They're going to do straight math, not try to monkey around with the numbers, and they'll inform both parties, okay, this is what you're entitled to and what the other party is entitled to. And you can negotiate. Once you have those numbers, you could say, well, you know what, and this happens very often, quite honestly, where if I'm the person earning the pension, I may say, you know what, I want to keep up all my pension. You keep the house. If it's an equal bargain, maybe that works. But many times people would rather keep their pension than other assets. But again, that's a factor of figuring out what each asset is worth. Because at the end of the day, the pension is an asset, and so is an IRA, 401k. But it's basically an asset because it's money.
Yeah. And so I wanted to so you mentioned there's pensions, there's IRAs, there's Roth IRAs, there's 401ks. Are they all treated in that same process, or are there any differences, like with an IRA from a pension, for example?
Well, again, the only really difference is when it's not a pension, someone has to know how much was in that fund at the date of marriage, or very, very close. I mean, if you're, let's say you got married on the fifth day of August, and you have a statement from even from September, probably close enough. You know what I'm saying, or August 1st, because most statements don't say August 5th or fifth day of a month. So as long as it's pretty close, it's probably pretty good. So that is a difference, because unless you have that documentation, and again, using my example before, if I'm married 20 years and I don't know when I got married whether I had 10,000 in that account or 100,000, and you can't just say, well, I know, I think I had this, or we believe it was so little, that doesn't really fly in court. They need some documentation or something that's pretty darn close to show what was in that account, because otherwise the court doesn't know, again, whether you had 10,000 or 100,000. So they may just say, we don't know. So sorry, you may have had 100,000 that you could have excluded, but we can't just say that is excluded. So the whole thing may come, the 50-50 instead of some part of it being excluded.
Yeah. So yeah, keep good records. That's the message I keep
Well,
hearing.
no one thinks they're going to get divorced,
records.
but unfortunately, that's
Yeah.
And the only thing I could say about that is that even if you didn't keep records, the plan itself is supposed to keep records for 7 or at least 6 years. So you can at least go back 6 years and do something if you were married, less than 6
Yeah.
years.
So we've talked about pensions and 401ks and IRAs. So there's one other big piece of the retirement puzzle, and of course that's Social Security. So how does a divorce impact Social Security benefits?
Well, Social Security is a federal benefit, okay? And they have their own rules that New York State cannot override. So your Social Security benefits do not affect anything in terms of your pensions or IRAs or how much, anything in that area. So whatever you're entitled to with Social Security, that's what you're entitled to. In New York State, we don't get involved in splitting that Social Security benefit, because the federal government does it. And there's rules for that. Again, that really you have to go to the federal site on whatever it says about Social Security. So it's really not involved per se in a divorce, because it is a federal benefit. And I mean, in theory, you could change it, but not really.
So it sounds to me like if I were to go through a divorce, whatever Social Security benefits I have accrued, those remain mine. Like that's not going to necessarily be affected by a divorce.
Yes and no, because
Okay.
what happens with Social Security benefits, if they look at both spouses' benefits, and the one who has less benefits can sometimes, grab the higher benefits or portion of it. You have to be married more than 10 years for that to happen. So it's not that you necessarily get to keep your own, but the divorce does not affect your benefits. Let's put it that way. Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Okay. Yeah, I see. So it's just kind of in a separate class from
It's really
the
not
IRAs and everything.
Right. It's not going to be considered in your divorce in New York State, at least.
So talk to me. This is when, let's see, we've been talking about getting divorced, and both people are still alive at the moment. What happens to survivor benefits during a divorce, particularly with pensions that offer like ongoing spousal coverage?
Right. Very good question. So in the divorce documents, it will have to or should discuss survivor benefits, because in a traditional pension, you can either opt into a survivor benefit or opt out. And of course, that affects, because it's like in a sense insurance. So if you opt into a survivor benefit, then as you're getting your pension, let's just forget about a divorce. In a regular, people when married, then they could be taking slightly less each month on a pension, and because they have to fund, in a sense, a life insurance for that survivorship benefit. And the same would be true in a divorce, that if you elect a survivorship benefit, both parties, in a sense, will be getting slightly less monthly, but then when one person dies, then there's a survivor benefit. And a good analogy, again, is a life insurance policy. With IRAs and 401ks, what has to, it's not called a survivorship benefit, but it's called a beneficiary. You have, forget about divorce again, when you have a 401k IRA, you list a beneficiary, almost always your spouse. And in a divorce situation, it's not really applicable, because what happens is that, again, let's just use simple numbers. Let's say the 401k has 100,000 in it. And in part of divorce, each party is going to get 50%. Again, forgetting about anything earned before marriage. So my partner would get 50K and I'd get 50,000. And then we each can pick different beneficiaries. There's no such thing as a survivorship benefit in that scenario. So because the funds are divided relatively soon after the judgment of divorce.
Oh, very interesting. Okay. And so then finally, David, could you just talk us through some of the most common mistakes you see people making when they're dealing with retirement accounts in a divorce, and how to avoid these?
Well, you want to make sure that in your divorce agreement that all the retirement assets are discussed. You can certainly waive them, but you want to make sure that it says, I am specifically waiving my husband's or my wife's pension, and even list the pension, whether it's a teacher retirement system or police officer pension, whatever, union pension. You never want to be ambiguous. You want to be as specific as possible. But a lot of that's from your attorney, but your attorney needs to know what you have. I mean, if you don't tell your attorney that there's a pension out there, how are they going to know? You know what I'm saying? So, but it's very important, again, to list everything. And again, same thing goes with the IRAs and the 401ks and anything else you may have. You want to say there's a Fidelity IRA account number 123, and this is what we're doing with it. So even if you're not splitting it or whatever, you want to make sure it's in the document that says we acknowledge there's a Fidelity 123 401k, but both parties were waiving it, whatever you're doing. You don't want to just say, we've determined what's going to happen or something very ambiguous. So it is very important to be list everything and make sure that there's something about it on either you're splitting it, dividing it, not dividing, or whatever you may be doing. And the language should be very clear. And you want to, as I mentioned before, there's a bunch of experts, many of them that many of the attorneys use that will do the math as I explained and make sure that the retirement assets are split, if you are going to split them equitably and the way they should be. So you want to make sure you use a company that's and again, the attorney will probably pick this, but a company that is responsive and has a lot of expertise in this area.
Yeah, experts are so critical, and that's why I'm so happy to have someone like you on the show that we can talk and get this information from, because otherwise, you may not know and you may commit a mistake that you didn't want to commit. So, but it
Right.
sounds to me like accuracy, transparency, honesty, like these are all things you want to focus on.
100%.
Yeah. Well, David, it has been a pleasure talking with you today. It's been super informative, super helpful. Thank you so much for being on the show.
No problem.
Yeah. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Divorcelaw with Attorney David Badanes. To connect with David, visit dbnylaw.com and be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.